All right. Well, it's 6:05, so let's go ahead and out of respect to you guys who are here, let's pray and get started. Lord, thank you so much for this evening. I thank you for everybody who's here and who's still on their way. I ask that you would help us to have a really great workshop and that this would be helpful for everybody who comes live and for everybody who sees the video later. Lord, we ask that you bless our time and we love you. It's in your
Please,
name.
Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
Well,
Thank you.
hello, everyone. My name is Mariah, and today we are doing a workshop on crafting an effective thesis statement. What we're going to be doing tonight is sort of taking you on a little bit of a journey. We're going to look at how the different steps to creating that effective thesis statement, and then we're going to see how really using an effective thesis statement can help be a really solid guide for our essay. So before we jump in, I know, Vanessa, you were saying before we really started the workshop that you were working on a thesis statement, but do we have any other prior experience with doing thesis statements? Either of you?
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a little. I haven't been back in school.
Mm-hmm.
First time I went to college, but I think it's a little different because my degree was in bachelor's in science and criminal justice. So, and it
Right.
was APA style.
Woo.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, a little bit different. A little bit
yes, it
different.
is.
So a little bit of experience, but it's been a while and it's sort of a
Been a
different
while.
thing. Okay, thanks,
Been a
Vanessa.
while.
How about you, Mr. Ronald?
Yeah, no, I just like I said, I didn't plan. I didn't, this is new for me. I went to
Mm-hmm.
high school with both technical training and everything like that, and in college I
Right,
went for a trade as well.
right.
I didn't finish college back in 2011, but I decided to
Mm-hmm.
come back finally, and God had led me to LBC pursue associates in biblical studies, and
Mm-hmm.
well, now I'm in a
Man.
writing and rhetoric class and
Yeah.
all this other fun stuff. So
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, I do enjoy it. I do enjoy it, and I look forward to learning it and using it well.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
definitely.
I don't have any experience really until the last couple about 3 months or whatever.
Right,
So
right.
like I said, I look forward to it. Yeah,
Fabulous.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
knowing that we don't have a ton of experience, let's dive in. And then if you guys have questions, feel free to stop me on the way. If you're like, hey, how can I apply this here? Just let me know. We'll see if we can pause for you.
Yeah.
So let's move
Okay.
forward. So first of all, let's talk about what a thesis statement is. So first of all, a thesis statement will directly answer the prompt or question posed by your professor. A lot of the time, your professor is going to say something like, hey, write a paper about this topic, and they're going to give you a topic directly. Sometimes they're just going to say something like, write a research paper on a topic of your choice. And that's going to be a little bit harder. That's actually what we're going to tackle today. We're going to practice tackling a research paper where the professor hasn't really given you much of a direction. So we're going to start with one of those hard ones. But oftentimes your professor is going to give you something specific, whether it's in your theology classes or in a psychology class or something, they're going to give you a specific direction. So your thesis statement is going to directly respond to that prompt or question. Next, your thesis statement is going to make a claim. Now, whenever I talk about claims, there are different kinds of claims. Sometimes your claim is going to be explanatory in nature. So you might say, there are a lot of effects from the state of Pennsylvania's laws regarding homelessness. Then you might start to talk about some of those effects. So that's a claim that I'm making. Or you might make a
Mm.
persuasive claim. So parents in the United States should not let their children use technology until they're at least 10 years old. That's a claim. And that type of claim is persuasive in nature. I'm trying to get you on my side of whatever topic I'm talking about. So a lot of your essays, especially in the biblical departments, are going to be more explanatory in nature. You're just going to be making some sort of expository things. Now, Vanessa, I know in LAN 100, you're working on an expository essay, right? So you're doing
Mm-hmm.
an expository is explaining something. So you're doing
Mm-hmm.
some kind of explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you move into LAN 101, there are going to be 2 papers in that class that are argumentative or persuasive.
Mm.
In our workshop today, we're going to practice with an argumentative one, but just know that the same principles can apply for an explanatory one as well. There's
Yes,
going to be
okay,
a couple of things that are going to be tweaked, and I'll point those out as we go along.
okay,
How are we feeling so far?
all right.
We're rolling. Next, your thesis statement is going to be some kind of roadmap. So it's going to show your readers and yourself. We're going to touch base on this again a little bit later. It's going to show your readers what's going on in your paper, and it's going to lay things out really, really nicely. And again, we're going to expand on that in just a moment. Next, usually, not always, but usually your thesis statement is going to be one single sentence. There are some exceptions. I actually just talked about them in my LAN 101 class today. But most of the time, your thesis statement, your professor is going to be looking for just one single sentence that tells your readers, this is the stance that I'm taking on this topic. Finally, your thesis statement is going to live at the end of your introduction. So sometimes your professor will say, well, as long as it's in the introduction somewhere, just make sure it's clear. I find, so as a professor, from the professor's point of view, I don't like to try to guess where your thesis statement is. I don't like to go on a little treasure hunt. So if you just have your thesis statement be one single sentence and it's positioned at the end of the introduction, then I know exactly what you're doing. You know exactly what you're doing, and we're all on the same page, and it's beautiful. So I recommend, even though very technically, whenever you, like if you go online and you look up, where should my thesis statement go? They will say that doesn't necessarily need to be the last sentence of your introduction. Your professors will appreciate it if it is one sentence and if it's at the end of your introduction. All right. How are we feeling?
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Let's roll. Now let's cover a few things that your thesis statement is not. Okay. First of all, your thesis statement is not just your topic. So I named some topics earlier. So let's say homeschooling, abortion, the death penalty, technology for teenagers. These are all just topics, things that I could explore, but I'm not taking a position on them. And it's not a sentence, it's just the broad umbrella of a topic. Now, as you're going to see in a second, the topic is where we're going to start things off. It's going to be where we launch, but it's not the end goal. We want to move from our topic into an actual sentence. Next, and I don't know why, sometimes my students don't quite get this. A thesis statement is not a question. You want to be able to move, again, from a topic to a research question, and that question is going to help to guide your research. But you don't want to just have your question be at the end of your introduction because of the type of writing that we're doing in college, where we're taking positions and we're trying to either explain something to our readers or we're trying to persuade them to come to our side. We want to actually tell the readers, this is the stance that I'm taking and I'm presenting to you. You're not trying to get the readers to come to their own conclusions. You want to present something to them. Now, there are going to be some times whenever you want to use a question really strategically in your writing, but it's just not going to be in the context of an academic essay in the place of a thesis statement. A thesis statement is doing something very specific. Next, a thesis statement is not a fact or an opinion. And you may look at me and be like, wait a second. If you take out facts and you take out opinions, what's left? That's a great question. So a fact, whenever we talk about it in this context, is something that's really obvious that you can't really argue about. So the earth revolves around the sun. Now, somebody actually might argue about that, but we might look at them and say, well, I think that you're living in conspiracy theory land, and it's not really a really debatable conversation. It's just something that we feel pretty certain is established. On the other hand, whenever I talk about an opinion, I might say something like, grapes are just my favorite fruit. And that's my opinion. And there's not really anything that you can say that's going to change my mind on that. It's just my opinion. I really love grapes. I think they're fabulous. And frankly, there's probably not much that I'm going to be able to say to change your mind on your favorite fruit, right? That's my favorite fruit. Leave me alone. Let me like whatever fruit I happen to like. So that's
Just
not what
a
we're
thing.
talking about whenever we talk about a thesis statement. A thesis statement is going to be a claim about something that maybe is debatable, something that maybe your audience doesn't know about. And again, this is going to be a little bit different depending on whether your essay is expository, informational, or if it's something that's persuasive in nature. So it's something that isn't readily apparent to your audience. Again, like the earth revolves around the sun. So if you're looking at impacts of homelessness in Pennsylvania, that might be an expository topic, but your audience probably doesn't know about it unless they have a degree in that field. So it's probably something that they would need to do research on in order to find
Do
out.
research.
That's an informational claim. On the other hand, again, a persuasive claim, which is where we're headed for this particular workshop, is going to be something where you're actually trying to convince the other person to come to your side, to actually transition from, okay, you were over there against the fence, and now I've brought you over into my territory. So not a factor in our opinion. Now, the next two are kind of closely related. Do you guys know what a hook is in an essay?
Something that catches your attention.
Exactly. Very good, Vanessa. And an attention grabber at the beginning of your essay is going to be the very first thing that grabs your audience's attention and says, ooh, something shiny. But it's not going to be everything that your essay is about. It's just the thing that grabs your audience's attention. We want to move past it to the actual thesis statement, which is going to be at the end of your introduction, not at the beginning. Finally, a thesis statement is not the introduction itself. I have had students who were like, whenever I asked them to turn in a thesis statement, and they turned in like 7 sentences. And I was like, what is this? And they're like, it's my introduction. I was like, good, I'm glad you worked on the introduction, but a thesis statement is just one part of your introduction. It's just going to be that last sentence positioned at the very end. We ready to move forward? Onwards and upwards. Ronald, how we doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Super.
Keep going.
All right, so why bother with a thesis statement other than your professor told you that you needed one? That's a good question. First of all, for us as the writer, the thesis statement actually does help us out. First of all, it provides focus. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I get excited about a topic, sometimes it's hard for me to decide exactly what I want to write about. I just finished a Bible study on Genesis, the book of Genesis, and because I really I love scripture and I love talking about everything, but Genesis is a long book. It's 50 chapters, and I wanted to do a Bible study that was only 10 weeks long. I know, crazy, right? So what did I need to do? I needed to focus my writing on certain stories, and I needed to say, I'm not going to talk about these things over here. As much as it broke my heart to say, I'm not gonna explain every aspect of this verse and every Hebrew word, I can't, because, well, nobody got time for that, right? We don't have time in a 10-week study to go through every single verse of 50 chapters of Genesis. And so your thesis statement is going to do the same thing. It takes all of the things that you could research about a topic and it limits them. And you say, okay, I'm only going to talk about these few things. And these are the things that I'm going to research, that I'm going to explore, and that I'm going to present my findings to my audience. Which is important for me because, again, I go off into the wild blue yonder of research, and then I come back and I'm like, can I tell you about all of the things? And they're like, no, we don't have time. Next, the thesis statement serves as a planning tool for you. Now, we're going to talk about this more toward the very end of our workshop. I'm going to show you how the thesis statement can connect to your outline. It's really, really helpful. If you can create a clear thesis statement at the beginning, it really helps to keep your essay organized as you write. So just pin that. We're going to come back to this at the end of our workshop. Next, for the reader, because whenever we write, how many of you guys like to do reflective writing? Anybody like to do reflective writing or journaling or something like that? Yeah. That kind of writing is really pretty much just for you. You're not writing to publish, you're not writing to talk to somebody. So I like to sometimes use reflective writing as like conversation with the Lord, but it's not going out to somebody. However, whenever we're doing essay writing or any type of academic writing, usually, we have some kind of audience in mind. Now, obviously, who's the audience always going to be whenever you're doing academic writing? Who's your ultimate
You.
audience? Yeah,
You.
the professor, right? The professor is going to be reading what you're writing. However, whenever we talk about audience, that's not really what we're meaning to say, because we want you to be imagining somebody that you're writing to. So right now in my LAN 101 classes, all of my students are writing
Are you calling me?
essays. And
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. So they're writing these essays, and so they're writing about, let's say, the LGBTQ agenda. And so I'm saying, hey, picture in your mind somebody who believes in that agenda, and you're trying to convince that person to walk away from that ideology. And so they're picturing, okay, what does that person believe? What does that person think? What kinds of arguments would be persuasive to that person? Why do we do this? Well, because yeah, academic writing is ultimately to your professor, but it's giving us practice for interacting with people in the real world. So even if you're doing something like writing an email, writing a text message, those are forms of communication that you're sending out, and in a way you're publishing it to somebody, even if it's just one other person. Now, sometimes you're going to end up going on to publish things online. Maybe you'll publish a book someday. Maybe you'll end up, I don't know what the Lord has in store for you, but you're at least going to have some kind of audience in form of some communication, and you may do more. And so we want to be thinking about, who am I writing to and what do they need to know? So a thesis statement does a couple of things for our readers. First of all, it gives them a map. Just like it serves as a planning tool for us, your thesis statement is going to tell your reader exactly what's coming up and the order in which it's going to appear. And again, we'll talk about this more whenever we get to a later step of the process. Finally, your thesis statement, it's sort of like after the hook. So after your attention is grabbed, the thesis statement tells your reader whether or not they want to read the rest of your essay. Whenever I do research and I'm looking through all of these different scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles, and I want to know, hey, is this something that's going to be helpful for me or not? They create something called an abstract, which is sort of like a preview, a summary of what everything in the essay is, or the article is going to be about. We don't have to do this for our essays, but the thesis statement kind of serves as an abstract for those readers. It says, hey, this is what my essay is going to be about. And it lets your readers, I want to know what's going on here. So that's why we want to make a thesis statement. I'm going to take a sip of water. That was very
Make
loud.
it clear and concise.
Clear and concise. You got it.
Okay.
All right. So we have 5 steps to develop a thesis statement. I'm going to go through all of them kind of fast, and then we're going to break each one down. So if I go really fast and you're like, wait a second, that was too fast, that's all right. We are going to go back and we're going to talk about each step.
Okay.
Step number 1 is going to be selecting a topic. Now, sometimes your professor is going to just tell you what you have to write about. They're going to say, okay, I want you to, in your theology class, pick one of these 3 topics within the realm of soteriology, and I want you to write 3 pages on that. And they're just going to give it to you. Other times, like in LAN 100 or LAN 101, they're going to say, hey, pick something you're interested in. And you're going to have to just be like, I have to pick something. Once you pick a topic, and again, we're going to go deeper, just doing a little bit of an overview, you're going to develop a research question. Now, a lot of people end up skipping this step. They say, you know what, I'm just going to jump right into the next piece. But I think that as somebody who is, if you're really interested in the field, developing a research question helps guide me towards something that I'm genuinely interested to discover the answer for. Rather than just saying, okay, well, I'm just going to write about this thing over here because I know about it and I have to write something. Okay, fine. But if you ask a question and you say, hey, I don't know if I know the answer to this question, then I become excited. I get interested and I'm like, I want to find out the answer to this question that I've come up with about this topic. Which leads us to step number 3, which is to answer the question that we've asked. Now, how do we do that? Well, you're going to have to end up doing a little bit of research to figure it out. But sometimes you're going to know part of the answer right away, but sometimes you're not. So it's going to depend on whether your essay is expository, if it's informational, or if it's persuasive. And I'll show you what I mean in just a second. But you may need to do a little bit of research before you can even begin to answer that question. Then, and this is where the metal hits the road? The rubber hits the road. Whew, metal hits the road, what am I talking about? This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yes.
Because you're gonna have to come up with some subclaims, some reasons, some evidence to support that claim that you've made, that answer that you've developed. And again, you are gonna probably need to do some research for this. And again, we'll get to a little bit more detail in just a second. The last step is taking parts 3 and 4 and combining them into one big, beautiful sentence, which will become your thesis statement. All right. So let's zoom in on selecting your topic. Now, again, for the purpose of this workshop, we're going to do a scenario where your professor has told you, hello, welcome to LAN 101, and you have to pick a topic to research that is debatable. You just have to pick something, some sort of debatable topic, and write a paper on it. And you're like, oh my gosh, well, there's a lot of stuff out there. Like where do I start? What I like to do is I like to go to LBC's library, and I like to go to their research guides. Now, in a moment, what I'll do is I'll actually exit out of the PowerPoint and I'll show you what this looks like. But I want to walk you through the steps first, and then we'll dive back in and I'll show you what it looks like live. So you're going to go into the section that says research guides, and it's going to be under the Find tab on the library. And you're going to go to the literature and language category under the research guides. You're going to click on it, and you're going to scroll down to the English composition LAN 101 class. There's a research guide as well for LAN 100 that's very similar. I'm just going to take us through the LAN 101 because it works. Then once you're there, it'll take you to the home page, but you want to click on the tab that says databases and tutorials. Once you're in that space, then you're going to see that there are 3, what I like to call the starter databases: Credo Reference, Issues and Controversies, and Galen Context. And these databases are very, very, very helpful. They're super helpful because they will tell you a whole bunch of topics that are researchable. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pause the show here. We're going to minimize this, and we're going to go, and I'm going to show you exactly what I just talked us through. So I'm on the LBC's homepage. Now I'm going to go to the library tab. You can also access this if you're inside your student portal. There's a link to the library from within the student portal. I'm going to scroll down. On the left-hand side,
database.
We're actually going to go to research guides. We could go to
Research
databases.
guides.
But this is going to show us all 3 in one spot. So I'm going to go to research guides. And then I have all these subjects. I'm going to scroll down to literature and language. And then I'm clicking on the class that I'm interested in, which is English Composition LAN 101. Again, it's very similar for foundations, but LAN 101, I know exactly what it looks like. So we're going to click on that one. And remember, I said that it takes you to the home screen, but we don't want the home screen. We want databases.
Data and tutoring.
You got it. Yep. And see right here, we have those 3 starter databases: Galen Context, Credo Pro Con, and Issues and Controversies. Now I could click on any of these. Let's say I start with Credo Pro Con. We're going to wait for it to load. And it takes us into the pro-con section of Credo Reference. Just so you know, if you click on this right here, Credo Reference, it'll take you to the home page of Credo. And Credo has a lot of references. So it'll have a lot of encyclopedias, a lot of dictionary entries, which is helpful. But we want to live for the purposes of this assignment in the pro-con space. And if you scroll down, you'll notice that it has all of these different topics. And there are 33. So I'm going to click on abortion just to show you what it looks like. And what this article does is it gives you the background of the issue, tells you some of the groups that are involved in the process, some background information. And then if you scroll down far enough, it'll take you to the arguments that are pro and con. So it'll say, hey, this is a debatable issue that has two really clearly debatable sides. And this is how you know that for an argumentative essay, this topic works because it's very debatable. It has two very clearly defined opposing sides. And so this might be something that I look through and I say, I think that this might be an interesting topic. Okay. And then maybe I go through and I do that a few more times until I have a couple of different options available. So once I've done that, I'm going to restart my PowerPoint here. Then what I might do is I might do a little bit of brainstorming, is I might say, okay, so I've looked at a whole bunch of topics. Now I want to sort of think through, I want to ping pong some ideas. Which ones did I like? And maybe I'll write them down. Maybe I'll just share them with a friend. Maybe I'll talk to my professor and say, hey, I'm kind of thinking about maybe this topic, maybe that topic. Any ideas? And you can help talk through which ones might work. So I have a few listed here. I have the death penalty, homeschooling, and then abortion. So those are some common talking points that are, not talking points, topics that are used in people's essays. Now, the next thing that I have here, which I'm not completely sure you can see because of my screen there, is free write. Now, how many of you guys have done free writing before? A little bit of free writing?
I have.
So, yeah, so free writing I think is a really helpful step because it helps me determine how much I already know about a topic and if I want to keep it. Because what I do with free writing is I set myself a timer, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and I say, okay, I'm going to write everything that I know about this topic. And then I set the timer and I go. And I see what I can write. And if I run out of something to say, I'm just going to say, I don't know what else to write until something else pops into my head. If I run out of things and I'm bored out of my mind 3 minutes in, I may not know enough to really feel excited about that topic. I may want to go back to the drawing board and pick something that I feel a little bit more passionately about, something that maybe I have a little bit more background about. Now, it's not necessarily bad if you don't have a lot of background information on a topic. Maybe you're really excited about it, but sometimes it can be hard to talk intelligently about something if you don't have some background knowledge on it. Now, some people are really good at picking up things fast. So I don't want to deter you if you're like, oh, but I'm really excited about this. I really want to research it. That's great. But just food for thought, strategies. So that's step one. Select your topic. How are we feeling?
All right.
Super. Once you've selected your topic, then you want to develop your research question. And again, what kind of question you develop is going to differ depending on whether your topic is, whether your paper is informational or if it's persuasive. So the question that I have right here, what I'm going to have is going to be thinking about your
audience.
Yeah, it's going to be about your audience no matter what, because you always want to have your audience in mind. Whether you're seeking to just inform them or if you're seeking to persuade them, you want to know who you're writing to. It makes a difference whether I'm writing to a group of Christian college students who are living in the United States, or if I'm writing to a group of atheists who are living in Uzbekistan, right? It's just gonna, like, it's the culture's different, but the impacts are like, everything's different. And so I want to know who I'm writing to. And then I want to think about my purpose. Again, am I seeking to just inform them, or am I seeking to persuade them? Or did my professor want me to do something specific? Did they want me to do a compare and contrast? Did they want me to do cause and effects? Like what does my professor want from me? And so taking a really close look at the prompt is going to help you as you develop your research question, because you're going to want to know, who am I writing to? What am I writing to them for? Very, very important. Then you're going to want to answer a couple of questions. You want to answer the questions how and why. So you don't want to just come up with a question that's really blanket and vague and sort of out there. You always want to be thinking one level down to develop a thesis statement. You want to be asking the questions how and why, because that'll make your thesis statement something that's interesting instead of just a yes or no question. Because if I say, let's say, should teens have technology? Yes or no? And you're just like, no, or yes, or whatever your answer is. And then, okay, that's your essay. Well, that's not that's not really enough, right? You want to develop it a little bit more. So maybe I say, okay, I do want to do that question, but I'm going to ask another question after that. Why shouldn't teens be allowed to have technology? Now that's an interesting question. Now I have somewhere to go. I have a direction. So I start off maybe with a question and I'm like, okay, should or shouldn't teens have technology? So that's the debatable topic, but now I have a direction to take it. I have a why to make it even more of a researchable question. Whenever you have a question and you're seeking to answer, we always want to keep in mind some checks. So first of all, are we focused? Vanessa, you were talking earlier about being concise and making sure we're focused. Again, if I'm going and I'm like saying, hey, I want to explain every single thing in Genesis. Is that focused? No. I may have a question about everything in Genesis, but for the purpose of a 10-week Bible study, that's too broad. It's too unfocused. Also, for our topics at school, we want our questions to be researchable. Now, I've only had it happen a couple of times, but I have had it happen a couple of times where a student wanted to pick something for their research paper, and there wasn't anything that was written about the topic. It was too niche. It was so specific and so in this particular category of the universe that there just wasn't anything to research about it. Like, and he really had a hard time. Really, it was just one time where a student was like, I really want to research this, but there really wasn't anything to research about it. So make sure that it's a topic that research exists that you can look into. At the same time, you want to make sure that it's something that's feasible for you to cover in the span of time that you have. So you may want to talk about all of the causes of homelessness ranked in order of severity across the entire world, but that's really big, right? And that's not really, I mean, maybe you want to write a book someday and cover all of those things. But if your professor is just asking for a 3 to 4 page paper in 2 weeks, that's not really feasible to cover that broad of a scope. And so you're going to want to narrow your focus to make it not just focused, but something that's actually doable for the amount of time and the amount of word count that you have available for you. Along with that, we want to be specific. Again, think about your audience. What do they want to find out about? Do they want to find out about everything under the sun? Or can you capture them with saying, hey, I'm looking at this specific thing over here. If I want to look at homelessness across the entire world is so big that it's hard to really get interested in that. But maybe I want to talk about homelessness in Kensington, Pennsylvania. Okay, well, maybe that sparks something. Maybe I'm thinking about, I want to write to legislators of Pennsylvania, and maybe that'll actually connect something for them. Okay, so now we're starting to really be intentional about connecting our audience to the questions that we're asking. At the same time, we want to be specific, but we also want to be complex. We don't want to be able to answer our research question with just a yes or a no. We want to be able to answer it in more than 3 sentences. And so you want to pick a question that's complicated enough, but you can do some research and answer it. You want to get to the end of something. You don't want to just stop. And we want our research to be relevant. Now, I caveat this a little bit because sometimes your professors are going to ask you to do something and it may not seem very relevant to us today, but here at Lancaster Bible College, we do hope that everything that we do here does connect to our lives and is practical. It is effective for us to be able to bounce off of and launch into other things. And so even as you're picking your own research, especially if you have the freedom to be able to choose your topic, pick something that's relevant to you. Pick something that's exciting for you. Pick something that you're like, I could spend, several hours over the, today and the next day and the next day doing some research and some writing, because you have some choice. You have some autonomy to be able to choose. So pick something that's relevant for you. Pick something that will interest you and that will excite you. So once you have these things sort of thought out, we have a sample question here. So should people homeschool? If so, why? And so if I picked the topic of homeschooling, let's say, if that's my topic, I want to move from the topic to my research question. So if I start off and I say, I think people should homeschool. Okay, but then I want to answer the question, why? So the question really becomes, why should people homeschool? I don't know. Let's take a look. Now, in order to answer this question, Well, actually, so the answer to this question, at least initially, is going to be yes. Let's say I'm in favor of homeschooling, and so I'm going to say yes. This will take us to step number 3, which is to start to answer the question with our claim. Now, this formula that I'm presenting for you, you don't always need to follow it. So and this is especially for an argumentative essay, so a persuasive essay. Your audience plus the word should equals your claim. Now I'm going to give you an example because this is very esoteric and sort of out there. Like, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. So attempt number 1, people should homeschool. And that starts to answer my question. So I've moved from question to a statement. Now, is this a complete thought? Is it a sentence? Yes. Yes, but it's very simple, right? And then you see your style, but I think I can read your lips. Yeah, it's really simple. It's really basic. And I haven't really developed it. So right now, my audience is people, right? Now, is people specific?
No.
No, it's so broad. I like people. Are we for real? Well, I'm glad I ruled out the aliens. Good job. So I want to be more specific whenever I think about my audience. So as I move forward and I think, okay, so audience plus the word should is the claim. So attempt number 2, parents in the US should homeschool. Ooh, now that's a lot more specific.
More
now I know
specific.
exactly who, okay, I'm picturing parents in the United States. Now I could go even further and I might say something like parents of elementary school students in the United States.
Okay.
Right? And so now I really have a really clear picture. I might even go further and say Christian parents of elementary school students. And now I have an even clearer picture of who I'm writing to.
Okay.
So whenever we develop our thesis, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes you are going to include your audience in the claim itself. You're going to include your audience in your thesis statement. Now you aren't always going to. So sometimes you may do something like abortion should be outlawed in the United States. Now, who am I writing to? I don't know. My audience isn't named in that thesis statement. I've just made a claim. Abortion should be made illegal in the United States. Whatever phrasing I just used, it's fine. So you aren't always going to name your audience in your thesis statement. I think it's strong too. I think it's a good thing to do because if you put your audience in your thesis statement, then you've reminded yourself, aha, this is who I'm writing to. And then you can sort of refer to that audience as you go throughout your essay, and it allows you to be very specific and very focused. Otherwise, you just have to remember. You just have to remember who you're writing to, and it's very easy to lose track of who you're writing to if you don't name your audience in your thesis statement. Now, some professors may say, look, you don't need to do that. You can just say abortion should be outlawed across the United States. And that's fine. This is just one template that you can use that I think is a very strong way to phrase it. All right. So we have our audience plus our should. And by the way, the word should is our key indicator that this is a persuasive essay. It's something that I'm trying to persuade my audience. This is something that should happen. If I was just doing an expository essay, I might say, medical marijuana has more negatives than positives, or it has more positives than negatives. And so that's also a claim. That's a claim about things that are potentially debatable, but you're at least making some kind of claim about stuff, but it's not persuasive. You're not necessarily trying to bring people to your side, you're just sort of laying some things out. So that's our first half. The first half of your thesis statement is the claim. It's going to have the audience in your main should. Everything in the essay links back to this. Everything, every single thing in the essay links back to this claim. The parents should homeschool. Every paragraph ties back to this main idea. This is the heartbeat of the essay. However, we don't want to stop there. We want to move from our claim to supporting it. And how are we going to do that? We're going to have to do some research to figure it out. Now, those starter databases, Gale and Context and Credo Pro Con and Issues and Controversies, are really good databases to help you figure out, how do I support my claim? So whenever we were going through and we looked at those arguments, okay, here are all of the pros. Those pros or those cons, depending on which side of the issue you're arguing, can help you discover, okay, what is the next piece of my thesis statement? And speaking of the next piece of our thesis statement, let's move on to the next slide, which is our subclaims. Now, subclaims are the word that I use to describe what you may see also as reasons or supports or evidences. Different professors use different terminology, so just know that they may call it something different. But these subclaims are the things that help to keep your thesis afloat. They're the things that you're actually going to talk about in the body paragraphs of your essay. Most often, not always, but often they're going to be linked to the first half of your thesis statement with the word because. There's also most often, not always, but most often there are going to be 3 of them. Why 3? Well, first of all, because if you're writing a 5-paragraph essay, you have your introduction and your conclusion on either end, and then you have 3 body paragraphs which can line up with your 3 subclaims. So that's just a really easy way to do it. Also, oftentimes, I don't know if it's just especially in the Western world today, but we like to remember things that are in 3s. So 3 is a nice, powerful number that helps your audience remember, this is what we're doing. It's not too many, it's not too few, it's not just 1. So you're like, okay, well, they didn't provide enough evidence for this, but it's not 7, and they've lost track of everything that you talked about in the first 2 paragraphs by the time you get to the end. So 3 is often what your professors will ask for, especially in your writing classes. They're oftentimes going to ask for 3. Again, you may have something, some professors may say, I want specifically 1 claim supported by 4 things, and they may tell you what those 4 things are. And if that's the case, you should just do whatever your professor tells you. But as a general rule, 3 is a good number to go with.
Okay.
Also, we want to make sure that we're using something called parallel structure whenever we're creating our thesis statement subclaims. I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to move my Zoom screen over here. So if I have my because here, and if we link it back, so people should homeschool, or parents in the United States should homeschool because homeschooling what? So it allows for better relationships to be developed.
Okay.
It gives flexibility.
Uh-huh.
And it produces decent educational results. And let's say this is my first draft, right? Now, I may not have known these things before I did my research. I may have had to do some research to figure out, okay, what are some reasons that people homeschool? What are some reasons that people like homeschooling? But now I've come to these 3 things. And these are the best things that I think. I'm going to focus on just these elements. Notice that all 3 of these are set up with present tense, and it's just a present tense verb. Homeschooling what? Allows, gives, and produces. They're all the same. Now I'm going to move to the next slide. This is the exact same thing that was on the previous slide. This is one way that you could set up those 3 subclaims. Because it allows, it gives flexibility, and because it produces. And those are all set up the same way. I could also change it to is statements. Homeschooling is relational, flexible, and educational. And I could actually just get rid of because homeschooling and make a sentence that says people should homeschool because it is relational, flexible, and educational. And that's parallel because they're all the same type of thing. And same thing, I have one more example for you. Now, this is a little bit different, Notice there is no word because. Instead, what I would do is, so these are infinitive phrases. The verb form is infinitive phrases. And I would say parents in the United States should homeschool to create relationships with students, to provide flexibility, and to produce educational results. Now notice, all 3 of these say the same thing. It's the same content, but it's just phrased differently. It's just phrased a little bit differently. And you can decide which phrasing you prefer, but what's important is that they're parallel. I wouldn't want to say people should homeschool to provide relationships with students because it is flexible and to produce educational results. That's not parallel. I took this middle one from the sample over here and put it down here. I don't want to do that. You want to keep the same structure all the way through. You guys ready to put it all together? Let's do it. Let's roll. All right, so this is attempt number 3. Parents in the United States should homeschool because homeschooling allows for better relationships to be developed, it gives flexibility, and it produces decent educational results. And so that's putting everything all together. I have my claim in the first half, and then I have all 3 subclaims in the second half. It's one big, beautiful sentence that I can put at the end of my introduction. And this will tell my readers exactly what I'm going to talk about in my essay. They know the entire thing is going to be about why parents should homeschool, and it's giving the 3 reasons, each of which is going to be developed in a separate paragraph. Now, if I was being picky, and why not, I might critique my thing a little bit and say, well, you know what, this thesis is a little bit vague. I don't know if it's really, I don't know, scholarly sounding. It sounds like gives flexibility. That's sort of weird. Produces decent educational results. That's sort of, I don't know, it seems kind of hesitant. I feel like I could clean this up a little bit. And you go back in because this is just a draft, right? You can work on this for years and make it better. You probably don't want to spend years on this, guys. We're on a timeline, but you can improve it. And so if I go forward and I see, okay, parents in the US should homeschool because homeschooling promotes relational development between parents and children. So I've specified the relationship there. It provides flexibility. So I shifted out the word gives and I used the word provides because it sounds a little bit more high tech. Still kind of broad. So I might want to refine that a little bit further, but it's at least a little bit more scholarly sounding. And because it produces high academic success. Now notice I actually, I don't know if anybody can catch it. My things are not parallel in this last one. Let's see if anybody can catch it. Something is wrong. Something's amiss in the state of Eden.
Okay, wait a minute. Relational.
It's tricky.
Relational development.
Relational development is actually okay,
It
but
is okay.
yeah, what I have, it's related to the word because.
I'm about to say because you said you took because out of there, not even to use it anymore.
Right. Well, I want to use it at least once for this
But
setup,
you
but
use
I
it
used it
twice.
twice. Exactly. Very good. So this isn't parallel. What I would need to do to make this parallel is get rid of this because. Now I could also get rid of the word it if I wanted to for both of these, because homeschooling promotes relational development, provides flexibility, and produces high academic success.
Okay.
So I've got options, but this example, it isn't parallel, so I would need to fix it before I submitted it. How are we doing?
Ooh, Lord.
Good.
So that's
Good, but you know, my writing just I'm looking at this like that's how I write. I might put a couple of the same words. I don't know.
yeah,
It'll
and
get better.
it is helpful, I think. So for me, whenever I draft, so my first thesis statements they always sound pretty terrible, right? They always sound like a 5-year-old wrote them, and I'm just like, I just need to get my ideas down. I don't need to be fancy. I just want to get my ideas down. And then what I'll use to help me is I'll use some of the terminology that maybe we've been using in class or with some of the textbooks that we've been reading or some of the articles that I've been finding and say, okay, what does the academic discourse around this topic sound like? And I'm going to try to elevate my diction to that level, just so that I can match it. So I can be like, okay, again, we're thinking about who am I writing to? If I'm writing to an academic audience, I'm trying to join the field here. I'm trying to say, okay, I thought of something. I want to present something to you, my academic audience, and I want to join you at the same spot where everybody else is. And so I'm going to try to match sort of what's going on. So I'm going to use some of the lingo that they're going to use. It's like whenever you guys are writing a theology paper, and you know how in the theology classes, they have the special words for things like the soteriology and the Christology, instead of just saying, okay, we're going to talk about salvation, guys. So we use the fancy words, but in the essay, what are we going to do? We're going to use the fancy words, right? Because we're showing our professor, hey, I'm tracking, I'm following what we're doing, right? I'm smelling what you're stepping in. And so it's the same thing with any other essay that we write. We want to sort of join the discourse that's going on. We want to use their language. Now, let's keep rolling. We have just a couple more slides here. Maybe. Okay. So now, remember at the beginning how I said that a thesis statement is going to serve both as a planning tool for you and as a roadmap for your reader. Well, this is where stuff gets real, all right? So I have below attempt number 4, just a blank outline. There's nothing in it, but these are essentially what you're going to fill in if you were doing something like a 5-paragraph essay and your professor was like, hey, I have this expository essay. I just want you to talk about, you have an introduction, a conclusion, and you have your 3 points that you're going to talk about. So this is very basic, just the outline itself. Now I'm going to advance the slide. Everything that's here will still be there, but I'm going to fill in the information from our thesis statement. Okay?
Okay.
So we can see here, I have our thesis statement, parents in the United States should homeschool because homeschooling. Now, the very first line before it goes on to the second line is our claim. Parents in the US should homeschool. Every single paragraph is going to connect back to that. But you can see with the color coding that each subclaim relates to each paragraph. So my first subclaim is it promotes relational development between parents and children. And that matches up with subclaim number 1. And so if I'm trying to organize my life, then any research that I find that talks about relational development, I'm going to put it in underneath subclaim 1. And whenever I write my paragraph, I'm just going to keep it right there. And I'm going to write about it underneath subclaim 1, because that's where that goes, because it was my first subclaim that I wrote in my thesis statement. Same thing with number 2. It provides flexibility is the second one here. If I come over subclaim number 2, it provides flexibility. Boom. It's number 2. Anything that I find that's related to flexibility, whether it's flexibility with time, flexibility with curriculum, whatever, that's going to be placed underneath subclaim number 2 in this space. And I'm going to type my paragraph about flexibility right there. And it's going to be the second thing. Now, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to talk about flexibility underneath relational development, because that's not where it belongs. It belongs under subclaim 2. And then, of course, subclaim 3, same thing. It produces a high level of academic success, matches up with number 3 down here, produces a high level of academic success. Anything that I find related to academic achievement, I'm going to put underneath subclaim 3. And it's going to be the third thing, the third paragraph that I talk about after my conclusion. So first body paragraph is about relational development. Second one is about flexibility. And the third one is about academic success. I keep myself organized, and it helps the reader to follow what I'm saying. Because I can tell you, as a professor, sometimes I read stuff and I'm like, my gosh, this is beautiful, but I have no idea where this person is going. We're out in left field somewhere. I think we went to outer space and we came back and I loved the view, but I have no idea what's going on. And so this is just a really strategic way that a thesis statement will help you know exactly what you're doing, know exactly where you're going, and it just lays out the structure for your paper.
So a question.
Yes.
With these 3 claims, how I'm receiving it is, once we make this first sentence, we're building on that sentence with the specifics of the claim.
Yes. You got it.
Okay. All right. Gotcha.
So, let me just say it back to you just to make sure for sure we're on the same wave here. So parents in the United States should homeschool. That's our first sentence. That's our claim. Everything else is building back to that. But that's what you're going to have to research to find the answer to. why should parents in the United States homeschool? And those specific answers that you find become these 3 subclaims, which are the actual things that you develop in your paper. But so for each one, so if I say subclaim number 1, homeschooling promotes relational development between parents and children. At the end of this paragraph, what I'm going to want to do is remind our readers why I'm writing the essay. Why am I writing the essay? Because I want to persuade them that parents in the United States should homeschool. So at the end of this paragraph, I'm going to say, because homeschooling does such a great job at promoting an atmosphere of relational development, parents in the United States should seriously consider homeschooling as an educational option. And then at the end of this paragraph, whenever I talk about the flexibility, at the end, when I'm done, I'm going to remind my readers, hey, this is why I'm writing this essay. And so because flexibility is so important for so many parents, perhaps especially for parents who have a really crazy schedule and are doing a lot of things, homeschooling actually may be the best option because of all the flexibility it provides. And then the same thing here. My paragraph is about the academic success of homeschool, but the reason I wrote the paragraph is to convince my audience that parents in the United States should homeschool. And so I want to remind them at the end of that paragraph.
Okay.
How are we feeling?
Okay.
Folks?
I don't know. Good.
Yeah. What questions do you guys have? Anything else?
I don't really have questions. I'm just it was good to go as a refresher because I have a flip-flop essay due,
Mm-hmm.
and I gotta have the rough draft and everything in. So
Yeah, and the flip.
I was asked to revise my thesis statement for clarity, so this will help.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, the flip-flop essay I think is a tough one because you have to write for the other side first,
Right.
and then you have to change to your side. So if I was doing this for the flip-flop, I would have to argue parents in the United States should not homeschool. And then I would have to pick my reasons why they should not. And so I might say, parents in the United States should not homeschool because, and then I'm like, okay, what are the most common objections to homeschooling? Because it can lead to neglect, because it doesn't.
Lack of social.
Right, they're antisocial, exactly.
Antisocial. It's a
and the-
variety of reasons.
Exactly. So, and that's what I would have to argue for the flip-flop first, before I got to flip around to my real position, which is I love homeschooling. I was homeschooled. I turned out all right, right? Turned
Yeah.
out decent. So if I can be the poster girl, I suppose, for homeschool. So, and that's, but that is the struggle with the flip-flop, is that you got to sort of get inside the mind of the opposition a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? Did you guys want to work through anything specific that you're looking at? We do have a little bit of time if you guys wanted to do it, or we could end at 7:03.
I mean, I've actually I've already done my thesis statement
Woohoo.
because it was, so I've already done that. That's what I was working on today.
Great.
So,
Awesome.
I guess, all right, so, all right, in the past week, we had some exercises where we had to identify the thesis in like a, like a longer format and stuff with the, it's probably about a couple paragraphs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was using, it was to identify the thesis statement properly and then, I'm trying to, and then see crafting effective. Then it was like it was with recognizing logical fallacies and everything else with all that. So like my struggle was trying to identify some of the thesis statements with all the information and stuff like that. Like it's fine when it's like shorter and stuff like that,
Right.
less informational and everything, but it gets a little bit more difficult as
Definitely.
so, maybe some tips to identify. I understand like it's the main claim and everything. I understand that, but sometimes it's difficult for me being new
Definitely.
to identify it and then to build off it, and I kind of get frustrated sometimes.
Oh, I feel that.
So like
I feel that.
I gotta take a breather and then but yeah, so So like,
Yeah, that's a good question. And I
Yeah.
think that it's important to clarify that whenever we're talking about a thesis statement, we are specifically talking about for something like an essay.
Yeah.
If you think about like a book and you're reading an entire book that's like 300 pages long, there's usually not one sentence that's like the thesis statement. Usually
Right,
the
yeah.
thesis is spread out throughout the course of maybe the last several pages of an introduction, right? And it's going to take a while for the author to say, this is basically what my book's about.
Right.
For an essay, like a practice essay, usually, not always, sometimes they're not kind to us, but usually it is going to be in the introduction. So whatever that
Yeah.
first paragraph is, usually it's going to be in the introduction. Usually it is going to be the last sentence of the introduction. Not every time, but usually it's going to be the last sentence of the introduction. And
Okay.
the
Yeah.
way you can check is to say, okay, what is this sentence about? And then say, okay, does everything in this essay relate back to this thesis statement? If it doesn't, if it's like a question or if it goes off in a totally different direction, then that wasn't the thesis
That's
statement.
not it.
I don't know what it was. I don't know
Okay.
what they were doing with their essay setup,
Mhm.
but it wasn't the thesis statement because the thesis statement is always going to tell the reader this is what the rest of the essay is about. And so that can be helpful too. If you can read the entire essay and sort of get a feel for what each
Yeah.
paragraph is about and sort of, if you can encapsulate it in just like a couple of words on the side and use that to sort of say, okay, so I can look down and I can see what is the essay about? And then I look back at that introduction to say, okay, which sentence talks about these elements? And if you
Right.
can find one that talks about all of those elements, that's probably the thesis statement.
Yeah, that's sometimes I'm so focused on the first, couple sentences, typical where a thesis should be, and then if I don't see it right away, because some of them aren't always in the beginning in some of these exercises, and so then like I kind of like, you know what I mean?
Right.
I never really sat down and took a deep breath and then read the whole thing and then came back to it like that. But thank you for that.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I'm glad that was helpful. Again, just taking the time to sort of sit back, read the whole thing, be like, okay, I'm just gonna jot a couple of notes to myself. What's this paragraph? What's this paragraph about? That can be really helpful. It actually, by the way, that's helpful too if you're trying to read an article, because those
Yeah.
are hard to read, man.
Yeah.
They're difficult. So if you can go sort of paragraph by paragraph and tell yourself, okay, did I understand all the concepts? What's the big picture idea from this paragraph? Was there a point that the author made? Was there a question that they, was it an illustration? What's this paragraph about? And then if you can jot a little note to yourself, I know it helps me whenever I'm reading some of those really complicated essays and articles.
Yeah.
There's some hard stuff out there.
Yeah, there's like like some of them were directed towards like, I don't know, the audience was like how do I want to put it, like instructors and stuff like that in a college setting and stuff like that, and it wasn't towards students, so the wording was a lot different. We had to identify the audience and everything else. But yeah, so like I'm starting to see the variations as I'm coming, halfway through LA, 101 and stuff like that. But like yeah, it's definitely it'll definitely help to look at it like that. Yeah.
Good. All right. Any other questions, concerns? All right. Well, friends, thank you so much for your time. Remember that you can always schedule an appointment with anybody here at the Ally Center. Keep a lookout for some upcoming workshops. I do have an upcoming workshop on doing PowerPoint. So if you enjoyed this PowerPoint presentation, you were like, I would like to make some cool PowerPoints, you should come to that one because it's going to be fun. But of course, you can keep track for all of our upcoming events and fun things. Run like you stole it, friends. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.
See you.
Have a good one.